My name is Sarah Calloway. I am 29 years old. 14 months ago, my husband went to work and never came home. Not because he left me, not because he chose to disappear, but because the ground swallowed him whole, and everyone who was supposed to find him told me there was nothing left to find. For 14 months, I believed them. Then one Tuesday evening, my best friend called me from across the country, and what she said made me drop everything in my hands onto the kitchen floor. But before I tell you what she found, I want you to know something first. I want you to know what those 14 months actually felt like. Because this story isn't just about what happened to my husband. It's about what happened to me while I was waiting for a truth that no one thought was coming. My husband's name is James Calloway. He was 32 years old when he left for the Hargrove Ridge mining site in eastern Kentucky. He had been working as a structural engineer for a contracting company that managed underground operations at several coal facilities across the region. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but James was good at it. He understood how things were built and how they could fail, and he took that responsibility seriously. He used to say that the men who went underground every day trusted him with their lives without ever saying a word about it. That thought kept him careful. That thought kept him honest. We had been married for 4 years. We lived in a small house in Clarksville, Tennessee, with a yellow front door that James painted himself the summer after we moved in. He said yellow was the color of something worth coming home to. I used to laugh at that. I don't laugh at it anymore. I think about it almost every single day. We also had a daughter. Her name is Nora. She was 2 years old when her father left for that job site. She is 3.5 now, and sometimes when she laughs a certain way, with her whole face, eyes closed, head tilted back, she looks so much like him that it stops me in the middle of whatever I'm doing, and I have to just stand there for a second and breathe. James had been at the Hargrove Ridge site for about 3 weeks when the accident happened. It was a Thursday morning. I was at home with Nora, making oatmeal, when my phone rang. It was his supervisor, a man named Gerald Pruitt. His voice was strange, flat and careful in the way that voices get when someone is trying not to say the worst thing too fast. He told me there had been a collapse. A section of the lower tunnel had given way during a shift rotation. Several workers had made it out. A few had been injured, but some were still unaccounted for. James was one of the ones they couldn't locate. I remember asking him what unaccounted for meant. I remember the silence that followed. And I remember that Nora was standing right behind me with her spoon, still waiting for her oatmeal, completely unaware that our lives had just split into a before and an after. The rescue operation ran for 11 days. I drove to Hargrove County and stayed in a motel 20 minutes from the site. My mother came to watch Nora. Every morning I woke up before sunrise and sat by the window and listened for my phone. Every evening the rescue coordinator gave a briefing in the parking lot of the site office, and every evening the news got a little quieter and a little harder to hear. On the 12th day, they called off the active search. The section of tunnel where James and 2 other workers had last been tracked had suffered a secondary collapse. The structural damage was too severe to continue safely. The official report listed the 3 men as fatalities. Presumed dead. That was the phrase they used. Presumed dead. I drove home from Kentucky alone. Nora was asleep in her car seat in the back. The radio was off. I didn't cry the whole drive. I didn't feel anything. I just kept both hands on the wheel and watched the road and told myself to get her home safely. That was the only job I had left that made sense. The months that followed were the longest of my life. People say grief comes in waves, and I think that's true, but what they don't always tell you is that sometimes the water never fully pulls back. Sometimes you're just standing in it at different depths. Some days it was at my ankles and I could function, get Nora dressed, answer emails, go to the grocery store. Other days it was over my head and I didn't know how I was still breathing. I kept James's side of the closet exactly the way he left it. I know that sounds like something people say in movies, but I genuinely could not bring myself to move anything. His flannel jacket, the dark green one with a torn left pocket he kept meaning to fix. His work boots lined up near the bottom. A small photo of Nora taped to the inside of the closet door that he had put there himself, so he could see it before he left for a job. I left all of it exactly where it was. I talked to Nora about her father every day. I showed her pictures. I told her stories. I wanted her to know who he was even if she was too young to hold on to the memory herself. Sometimes she would point at a photo of him and say Daddy in this very matter-of-fact way, like he had just stepped out and would be back any minute. Those moments were the hardest ones. The casual certainty of a 3-year-old who doesn't understand permanence yet. My best friend, her name is Priya, had moved to Portland, Oregon, 2 years before all of this happened. We had been close since college. She checked in on me constantly after the accident. Text messages every few days. Phone calls on Sunday evenings. She was careful not to push, but she was always there. One of the few people who didn't disappear after the first few weeks the way some people tend to do when grief makes them uncomfortable. On a Tuesday evening in October, 14 months after the accident, I was sitting on the couch after putting Nora to bed. I was doing nothing in particular, just sitting. I had gotten into the habit of that, sitting in the quiet after she went to sleep and not really doing anything for a while. It was one of the ways the evenings felt survivable. My phone lit up. It was Priya. I answered expecting our usual check-in, but the moment I heard her voice, I knew something was different. She sounded the way my sister sounds when she's trying to stay calm but isn't. "Sarah," she said. "Are you sitting down?" I told her I was. She went quiet for just a second. Then she said, "I need you to look at something right now. I'm sending you a link. Don't read the caption yet, just look at the photo first." I felt something cold move through my chest. "What is it?" I asked. "Just look at it first," she said, "then call me back." The link loaded slowly. It was a post from a small community organization in a town called Meredith, West Virginia. They ran some kind of local outreach program, meals and support services for people in rural areas. The post was from 3 days earlier. It showed a group of volunteers at some kind of outdoor community event. People standing around folding tables, paper plates, that kind of thing. In the back of the photo, slightly out of focus, standing near a chain-link fence with a paper cup in his hand, was a man. My heart stopped. He was thinner. His hair was longer than James had ever worn it. There was a beard that James never had. But the way he was standing, the particular angle of his shoulders, the way his head tilted slightly to the left, which was something James always did when he was listening to someone nearby without looking directly at them. I had lived with that posture for 4 years. I knew it the way I knew my own hands. I called Priya back before I had even fully processed what I was looking at. "I know," she said before I could speak. "I know. I saw it too." "How did you find this?" I asked. My voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. She explained that she had been scrolling through a community support group on social media, one of those regional pages people use to share local news and resources. Someone had shared the post from the Meredith organization. Priya almost kept scrolling. But something in the photo caught her eye. She stopped. She zoomed in. And then she sat there for 10 minutes trying to decide if she was imagining it before she called me. "Is it him?" she asked quietly. I didn't answer right away. I zoomed in as far as the image would let me. The man was looking slightly away from the camera. You couldn't see his face head-on, but there was something else I noticed. Something that made my hands start shaking against the phone. On his right forearm, just below the rolled-up sleeve of his shirt, there was a mark. A scar, irregular and pale, in roughly the shape I had traced with my finger 100 times while we were watching television on Sunday evenings. James had gotten that scar at 17 falling off a roof while helping his uncle with repairs. He always said it looked like a river on a map. I had always said it looked like a lightning bolt. We had argued about it affectionately for years. The man in the photo had the same mark. "I'm going there," I said. "Sarah," Priya said carefully. "We don't know for certain yet. I think we should try to reach someone first." "I know," I said, "but I'm going." She booked the first available flight with me over the phone that night. Meredith, West Virginia was a 5-hour drive from the nearest airport. We found a flight into Charleston and arranged a rental car. Priya changed her own schedule and flew in from Portland. We met at the Charleston airport the following afternoon. The drive to Meredith took us through some of the most quietly beautiful country I had seen in years. Long ridges covered in oak and pine, narrow two-lane roads that curved through small towns with one gas station and one diner. Under any other circumstances, I might have found it peaceful. That afternoon, it felt like driving through a dream where the landscape keeps stretching no matter how far you go. Priya drove. I held my phone in my lap and kept looking at the photo. By the time we reached Meredith, it was late afternoon and the sun was sitting low and orange over the ridgeline. The community organization's address took us to a converted storefront on the main road through town. There was a hand-painted sign in the window. The lights were still on inside. A woman in her 60s was stacking chairs near the back when we pushed open the door. She looked up without alarm, the way people do in small towns where strangers aren't necessarily suspicious. I told her why we were there. I showed her the photo on my phone. I explained about James, about the accident, about the 14 months. I told her I knew it might not be him, but I needed to know. She set down the chair she was holding and looked at the photo for a long moment. Then she looked at me and said, "That's Joseph." I felt the floor shift under me. "Joseph?" She nodded slowly. "He came to us about a year ago," she explained. "Someone found him wandering along Route 16 about 12 miles east of here. He was in rough shape. Dehydrated, injuries to his head and shoulder, no identification, no phone, nothing." She paused. "He didn't know his name, didn't know where he'd come from. The hospital treated him for about 6 weeks, and when he had nowhere to go afterward, some folks in town took him in. He's been here since, helping out where he can. He's a good man. Quiet. Works hard." My throat was so tight I could barely form words. "Does he know?" I managed. "Does he know he might have a family somewhere?" She looked at me carefully. "We tried to find his people early on," she said. "But without a name, without any identification, it was very hard. He's been here so long now that I think some folks stopped looking as hard as they should have." She said it honestly, without excuse. "I'm sorry for that." Priya put her hand on my arm. "Can I see him?" I asked. The woman, her name was Dottie, made a phone call. 20 minutes later, she drove us in her truck to a farmhouse about 4 miles outside of town. An older couple, the Harmon family, had been letting James, or Joseph as they knew him, stay in a small room off the back of their house. In exchange, he helped with property work, fencing, repairs, the kind of thing he had always been good at. The farmhouse had a wide front porch and a dog sleeping on the steps. As Dottie's truck pulled up the gravel drive, the front door opened and a man stepped out onto the porch. Even from a distance I knew. I knew the way you know something that lives in your body, not in your head. The way he stood. The way he put one hand on the porch railing and looked toward the truck with his head slightly tilted to the left. I was out of the truck before it fully stopped. I heard Priya say my name behind me. My feet hit the gravel and I walked toward the porch steps and I looked up at him and 14 months of everything I had been carrying hit me all at once. "James," I said. He looked at me. His face was older somehow. The beard, the longer hair. A faint scar near his temple that hadn't been there before, but his eyes were the same. They were always the same, this particular shade of dark brown that caught the light in a specific way I had never been able to describe to anyone. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Not recognition exactly, but not blankness either. Something in between, something searching. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. His voice was the same. Even that was the same. "Do I know you?" I couldn't answer. I just stood there with tears running down my face, trying to breathe. The doctor in Meredith who had treated James in the early weeks met with us the next morning. He was a straight-talking man named Dr. Farrell who had clearly been troubled by the situation long before we arrived. He explained that James had suffered a severe traumatic brain injury, likely from a combination of the tunnel collapse and the secondary cave-in. Blunt force trauma, oxygen deprivation, and significant blood loss had together caused a specific kind of memory disruption. Not total. Not uniform. More like a fog over certain rooms, while other rooms remained fully lit. He remembered how to do things. He remembered how to read, how to do complex calculations, how to fix a fence post or evaluate structural damage in a building. Procedural memory, Dr. Farrell called it. The knowledge of how. What he had lost was episodic memory. The personal history, the people, the life. He didn't remember the accident. He didn't remember Kentucky. He didn't remember Clarksville, or our yellow front door, or any of the 4 years we had built together. He didn't know his own name until someone gave him one. I asked if it could come back. Dr. Farrell was honest with me. Sometimes it does, he said. Not always completely, not always quickly. Familiar environments, familiar people, familiar sensory experiences. These things can sometimes unlock what the injury has buried. But there are no guarantees. You need to be prepared for both possibilities. I told him I understood. I thanked him. And then I went back to the Harmon farmhouse, where James was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the morning come over the ridge. I sat down in the other chair without asking. He looked at me without alarm. He had been told who I said I was. He was trying, I could see that. He was looking at me the way you look at a word you know you should recognize, but can't quite pull into focus. Over the following weeks, I did everything I could think of. I brought photos, I told him stories. Not desperately, not with pressure, but gently, the way you'd show someone a place you loved and just let them take it in at their own pace. I told him how we met. At a mutual friend's birthday party where he spent 20 minutes explaining to me why a certain bridge in Nashville was a structural marvel, and I pretended to be more interested in bridges than I had ever been in my life. I told him about our first apartment, the one with the radiator that clanked all winter and the neighbor's cat that somehow kept getting into our hallway. I told him about the yellow door. He listened to all of it. He never got impatient. He never seemed frustrated by what he couldn't remember. But his eyes stayed polite and careful, the way eyes look when someone is listening to a story about people they haven't met. Then one afternoon I brought Nora. I had gone back and forth about it for days. I didn't know if it was right. I didn't know if it was too much for her, or too much for him, or too much for me to watch. But something told me to try. Something that I couldn't explain logically, but that I trusted anyway. She was dressed in a red sweater because it was getting cold in the evenings. She had her hair in 2 small pigtails that I had done that morning, and she was carrying the small stuffed elephant she had slept with every night since she was born. James had bought that elephant at a gas station on the drive home from the hospital the day she was born because we had forgotten to bring a stuffed animal, and he couldn't stand the thought of her not having one on her very first night in the world. We walked up the porch steps together. James was sitting in his usual chair. He looked up when we came out the door. His eyes went to Nora immediately, the way adult eyes always do when a small child enters a space. Nora looked at him for a moment with the frank, evaluating gaze that small children have before social awareness teaches them to be subtle about it. Then she walked directly over to him, held out the stuffed elephant, and said, "This is Peanut." Something moved across James's face. A flicker. Something fast and almost involuntary, like a reflex. He looked at the elephant. His hand came up slowly and he touched one of the worn fabric ears. His brow pulled together. His jaw tightened in the way it always did when he was trying to work something out. Nora watched him patiently. Then she said in that certain way she had, the matter-of-fact way that broke my heart every single time, "You're my daddy." James went very still. I stood near the doorway and I did not move and I did not breathe. His eyes stayed on Nora's face for what felt like a very long time. Then they moved up to me. His expression was something I had never seen on him before and something I recognized completely at the same time. It was the look of a man standing at the edge of something enormous and only just beginning to understand how far it goes. His eyes filled. He made a sound that wasn't quite a word. He pressed one hand over his mouth. Nora, apparently unbothered by any of this, had already moved on to examining the arm of his chair with great interest. Then, in a voice that cracked almost beyond recognition, he said my name. Sarah. The sound of it came out rough and uncertain and absolutely certain all at the same time. I crossed the porch in 3 steps, and I put my arms around him, and I felt his arms come up around me with a kind of desperate and exhausted relief. The way a person holds something they thought was gone for good and can't yet believe they're holding. He was shaking. I was shaking. At some point, Nora climbed up onto the chair beside him and pressed herself against his arm with complete confidence, the way small children attach themselves to things that belong to them. He kept saying my name, just that, just Sarah. Over and over, quietly, like he was making sure it was real. There were more months ahead. The road back was not a straight line. Memory doesn't return all at once. It comes back the way light comes back at the end of winter, gradually, unevenly, certain things bright and clear before others. He remembered the yellow door before he remembered our wedding day. He remembered the name of his high school before he remembered how to get to the house where he grew up. There were gaps that filled in slowly and some that may never fill in completely. But he came home. We drove back to Clarksville together in the spring, the four of us, with all of James's things in the back of the rental car, which wasn't much. He stood in the driveway and looked at the yellow door for a long time without saying anything. Then he turned to me with wet eyes and said, "I told you. That's the color of something worth coming home to." I didn't laugh this time either, but for a completely different reason. What I want you to take from this story is something that I had to learn the hardest possible way. Don't let other people's certainty become your own. The officials had a report. They had protocol and evidence and every professional reason to close the file. And they were wrong. Not maliciously, not carelessly, just wrong. People are wrong sometimes about things that feel absolute. Your instinct, that quiet, persistent part of you that keeps saying something doesn't add up, that part is worth listening to. It doesn't always lead somewhere. But sometimes it leads you back to the person you thought you'd lost forever, sitting on a farmhouse porch in West Virginia with a paper cup in his hand, waiting without knowing he was waiting. James is still working on remembering. Some days are easier than others. Nora has decided that he is her daddy with or without the details, which is the most uncomplicated and profound thing I have ever witnessed. And I am still, every single day, grateful for a best friend who almost kept scrolling. If this story reached you today, wherever you are, and it made you feel something real, please like and subscribe to Heartway Stories. Leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Because every single day, someone somewhere is living through something that sounds impossible, and sometimes the ending is better than you ever let yourself believe it could be.